The night you discover the truth is never the night you plan to survive. I used to believe expensive hotels only hid famous guests and overpriced wine. I was wrong. They hid secrets too. My name is Emily Carter, and at 26 years old, I spent most evenings balancing silver trays instead of chasing dreams. Waiting tables at the Ashford Grand wasn't glamorous, but the tips helped cover my rent, my car payment, and the endless stack of medical bills left behind after my mom passed away. I had learned to smile through sore feet, aching shoulders, and the sideways looks people gave a chubby waitress who never quite fit the polished image of a luxury ballroom. That Friday started like every other gala. Crystal chandeliers reflected across marble floors. A string quartet floated through the air while guests laughed over champagne that cost more than my weekly paycheck. Everyone looked like they belonged inside that glittering world except me. I kept my eyes down, repeated my rehearsed greetings, and reminded myself that another 6-hour shift meant another step closer to paying off what life still owed me. Around 9 o'clock, the banquet manager rushed toward me with panic written across his face. One of our VIP clients had requested a rare bottle from the private wine collection stored beneath the hotel. The regular cellar attendant had gone home sick. "Just deliver it and come right back," he whispered. "Don't wander. That level isn't part of the hotel tour." I nodded without asking questions. In places like the Ashford Grand, curiosity was considered more dangerous than incompetence. The service elevator carried me beneath the bright ballroom into a level that felt like another world. The music disappeared. Warm light gave way to cool white fixtures humming softly overhead. Every hallway looked identical, spotless and silent, lined with reinforced steel doors instead of guest suites. My sneakers echoed against polished concrete while I followed the directions written on a small card. Left. Right. Another left. Then the final door. The bottle rested exactly where I had been told it would be, sealed inside a temperature-controlled cabinet. I carefully placed it on my cart and turned around, only to realize every hallway suddenly looked unfamiliar. I checked the card again. Somehow it no longer made sense. The signs above each corridor displayed simple numbers instead of names, and none matched what I remembered. My heartbeat quickened. I chose one hallway. Then another. Every turn seemed to lead farther away from the elevator. I reached for my phone. No signal. The concrete walls swallowed everything. Even my breathing sounded distant. Then I noticed a heavy black door standing slightly open at the end of the corridor. A thin line of warm golden light spilled across the floor. Every instinct told me to keep walking. Instead, I found myself moving closer, one cautious step at a time. I pushed the door no more than an inch. Beyond it wasn't another wine cellar. It was a vault. Shelves stretched farther than I could see, holding locked boxes, old journals, framed photographs, antique watches, faded letters, and objects that looked far more personal than valuable. It felt less like a bank and more like someone's carefully protected memories. I barely had time to whisper, "What is this place?" before the massive steel door swung completely open behind me. A calm voice filled the room. "I was about to ask you the exact same question." I turned slowly. A tall man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit stood in the doorway, his blue eyes locked on mine with quiet certainty. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't angry. Somehow that frightened me even more. Without raising his voice, he looked directly at me and said, "Nobody finds this vault by accident." My mouth went dry, but somehow I still found the strength to answer. "I am sorry. I got lost. I was delivering a bottle of wine, and I took the wrong hallway." The words sounded painfully small against the silence surrounding us. The man studied me without blinking. He looked to be in his mid-30s, calm enough to make everyone else nervous. Nothing about him suggested panic or anger. His confidence filled the room more completely than the rows of locked shelves behind him. "Your name," he said. "Emily Carter. You have worked here long." "Almost 18 months. He nodded once, as though confirming something only he understood. "You have never been on this level before." It was not a question. No. Then explain why you opened that door. I swallowed hard. Because I thought it was the exit. For the first time, one corner of his mouth almost moved. Not a smile. More like disbelief. Most people would have turned around. Most people probably know where they are going. I regretted saying it the second the words escaped. He continued watching me, but instead of looking offended, he seemed curious. His blue eyes shifted toward the silver cart beside me. The unopened bottle of wine still rested exactly where I had placed it. You never touched anything. Was I supposed to? I asked before realizing how foolish that sounded. A quiet breath escaped him, somewhere between amusement and restraint. No. The enormous vault remained perfectly still around us. I could hear the soft hum of the climate system and the faint ticking of an antique clock displayed behind reinforced glass. None of the objects looked ordinary anymore. Every shelf appeared carefully arranged, every box labeled by hand instead of machine. Whoever owned this place valued memories far more than appearances. Then my eyes landed on a faded stuffed rabbit sitting inside a glass case. It looked worn from years of being hugged by a child. Everything else in the room seemed expensive. That toy did not belong. Without thinking, I whispered, someone must have loved that rabbit. The man's expression changed so quickly I almost missed it. His shoulders remained still, but something behind his eyes flickered. It disappeared before I could understand it. Interesting observation, he said quietly. Most people notice the watches first. I shrugged. My mother used to say expensive things can always be replaced. Childhood memories cannot. The silence that followed felt different. He looked at me as if I had accidentally spoken a language he had not heard in years. Before either of us could say another word, two men in dark business suits entered through the open vault door. They stopped the instant they saw me. Neither raised their voice. Neither rushed forward. Yet, the atmosphere became noticeably heavier. "Sir," one of them said calmly. "Everything is secure." The man standing in front of me gave a small nod without taking his eyes off mine. "Miss Carter seems to have taken an unexpected tour." One of the men reached for a small communication device clipped to his jacket. "Should we notify hotel management?" My heart nearly stopped. Losing this job would mean losing everything I had worked for. "Please," I said, forcing myself to meet the stranger's eyes. "I cannot afford to be fired. I swear I did not come here looking for trouble." He remained silent for several long seconds. Finally, he spoke without looking away. "Leave us." Both men hesitated. "So?" That was not a suggestion. They exchanged uncertain glances before quietly stepping back into the hallway. The heavy steel door remained open, but suddenly the room felt even more isolated than before. The stranger folded his hands behind his back and asked one simple question that made every heartbeat inside my chest stumble. "Emily, have we ever met before?" The question caught me completely off guard. I searched his face, hoping something would feel familiar, but all I saw was a stranger dressed in confidence and impossible wealth. "No," I answered honestly. "I would remember meeting you." He continued studying me for another long moment before giving the slightest nod, almost as if he believed my answer while wishing it had been different. "Perhaps," he said quietly. "Or perhaps memory is less reliable than we like to believe." I frowned, unsure what he meant. I really should get back upstairs. "The guests are waiting for that bottle." Instead of responding, he walked past me toward one of the shelves built into the far wall. Unlike the others, this section held no jewelry, no watches, and no locked cases. It contained photographs. Hundreds of them. Some were black and white. Others had faded with age. Families standing in front of old houses. Children laughing beside lakes. Holiday dinners. Graduation ceremonies. Ordinary moments frozen forever. It felt strangely comforting compared to the intimidating steel surrounding us. "This is not what I expected," I Admitted. People usually imagine vaults differently, he replied without turning around. Most assume they exist to protect money. What do they really protect? His hand rested lightly against an old wooden picture frame. Whatever someone cannot bear to lose twice. His answer lingered in my mind long after he stepped away. There was sadness hidden beneath those words, carefully controlled but impossible to erase. My eyes wandered across another shelf until something unexpectedly caught my attention. A framed photograph had slipped slightly sideways. Without thinking, I reached out to straighten it. The instant my fingers touched the frame, a folded piece of paper slid from behind it and drifted gently onto the polished floor. I gasped and immediately bent down to pick it up. I am sorry. I did not mean to. Before I could finish, he was already beside me. Neither of us reached the paper first. We both stopped when we noticed what had fallen with it. A small silver charm in the shape of a crescent moon rolled across the floor and came to rest against my shoe. I stared at it without understanding why my chest suddenly felt tight. The charm looked strangely familiar. Not because I had seen that exact piece before, but because it reminded me of something I could almost remember. A dream. A childhood memory. A feeling just beyond reach. The man picked it up carefully, holding it in the palm of his hand. His expression changed in a way I had not seen before. The calm certainty disappeared. Confusion took its place. That is impossible, he whispered. What is? I asked. He looked directly into my eyes. My family commissioned only 2 of these charms more than 20 years ago. I blinked. I have never seen one before. He seemed barely able to hear me. His attention remained fixed on the tiny silver moon. Then, almost cautiously, he asked, Emily, did your mother ever tell you where you were born? I hesitated. Not exactly. She adopted me when I was 4 after spending years as my foster parent. She always said my records from before then were incomplete because of an apartment fire. He closed his hand around the charm. The room became silent once again. Somewhere above us, the distant music from the ballroom barely reached the vault, sounding as though it belonged to another world entirely. When he finally spoke again, his voice had become quieter than ever. Then I believe someone spent a very long time making sure you would never find this room. The word settled over me like cold rain. I stared at him, trying to decide whether I should laugh or run. I think you have the wrong person, I said quietly. My life has never been mysterious. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. My mother worked 2 jobs. We rented the same apartment for years. I have never had hidden relatives or secret inheritances. He listened without interrupting, but his eyes never left my face. It was as if he were comparing every word I spoke against memories only he could see. Finally, he slipped the silver moon charm into his jacket pocket with remarkable care. People do not always lie with words, Emily, he said. Sometimes the lies are written into the records they leave behind. Before I could ask what he meant, his phone vibrated once. He glanced at the screen, typed a short reply, and locked it again without changing his expression. Your manager has already been informed that I requested additional wine recommendations. He believes you are still working. I blinked. You covered for me. I postponed unnecessary questions. Why? He answered almost immediately. Because I do not believe tonight was an accident anymore. My heartbeat quickened again. You think someone sent me here? I do not know what to think yet. His honesty surprised me more than any confident answer could have. Powerful men were supposed to have every solution ready. This one admitted uncertainty, and somehow that made him seem even more intimidating. He walked toward a long oak table positioned near the center of the vault. Spread across its polished surface were old maps, handwritten journals, and several leather folders. He opened one slowly before turning it toward me. Inside was a newspaper clipping protected by clear archival paper. The date at the top read 22 years earlier. The headline mentioned a historic apartment building destroyed by a late-night fire. My chest tightened immediately. That cannot be, I whispered. My adoption records mention a fire. He nodded once. I noticed. I looked closer. The article listed several residents who had been rescued and others whose identities had never been confirmed. There were no photographs, only names blurred by age. Why would you keep this? I asked. His gaze drifted toward the shelves behind us. Because someone I cared about disappeared that night. The quiet sincerity in his voice erased every frightening rumor I might have imagined about him. For a brief moment he no longer looked like an untouchable businessman surrounded by secrets. He looked like a man who had spent years searching for an answer that never arrived. I carefully closed the folder. I am sorry. He gave a faint shake of his head. Do not apologize for a story you did not write. The sentence stayed with me. Then I noticed something resting beside the newspaper. It was a small guest service badge from the Ashford Grand Hotel. The design looked older than mine, but unmistakably similar. Someone from this hotel? I asked. She worked here many years ago, he replied. She believed memories deserved protecting even when people did not. Before I could ask another question, the vault lights dimmed for a brief second as the security system quietly shifted into its overnight cycle. A soft electronic chime echoed through the room. Damien looked toward the entrance, his calm expression returning almost instantly. Someone else is coming, he said. And if they see you standing beside that file, everything becomes much more complicated than either of us is ready for. My pulse hammered so loudly that I barely heard the approaching footsteps beyond the vault door. Damien moved with calm precision, closing the newspaper folder and sliding it back into its exact place on the oak table. Every motion suggested years of discipline. Nothing appeared rushed, yet everything happened just in time. He looked at me and lowered his voice. Stand beside the wine cart. If anyone asks, you have been waiting for my recommendation. I nodded without arguing. Somehow, trusting him felt easier than trying to explain why I had wandered into a room I never should have found. Seconds later, the steel door opened, and an older gentleman in a navy suit stepped inside carrying a leather portfolio. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his posture reminded me of someone who had spent decades protecting other people's confidence. Good evening, Mr. Moretti, he said warmly before noticing me. His polite smile faltered for only a heartbeat. I apologize. I did not realize you had company. Damien answered before I could speak. Emily is helping with the private dinner upstairs. I asked her to wait while I selected a bottle. The man accepted the explanation with a courteous nod, but I noticed his eyes lingering on me a fraction longer than necessary. Not suspicious. Curious. Very well, he replied. The archive inventory is ready for your signature whenever you have a moment. Archive. That single word echoed inside my mind. Not vault inventory. Archive inventory. Damien accepted the portfolio and thanked him before the man quietly excused himself. As the heavy door closed again, I finally released the breath I had been holding. Archive? I asked. You called this an archive? Damien looked around the room as though seeing it through my eyes for the first time. That is what it has always been. But everyone would assume this place stores priceless valuables. It does. He rested one hand lightly against an old wooden shelf. People simply misunderstand what priceless means. I slowly turned in a circle, taking in everything I had overlooked before. Every object represented a memory. A faded birthday card. A child's baseball glove. A music box with chip paint. Family photographs. Handwritten recipes. Letters tied together with blue ribbon. None of it belonged in a place built like a fortress, yet somehow everything did. These belonged to people you knew. I asked. Some belonged to my family. Others were entrusted to me by people who wanted their stories preserved. His answer felt genuine, but one question refused to leave my thoughts. Then why keep the newspaper about the apartment fire? he remained silent for several seconds. Because that story never ended. I stared at him. You really believe I am connected to it? I believe coincidences become less convincing when they continue multiplying. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated inside my apron pocket. I glanced at the screen. It was my manager. 5 missed calls. 3 text messages asking where I had disappeared. Embarrassment washed over me. I have to go upstairs, I whispered. If I lose this job, I lose my apartment. Damien gave a small nod. You should leave. Relief spread through me until he spoke again. But do not ignore unknown phone numbers over the next few days. I looked up in confusion. Why would anyone call me? His expression grew thoughtful, almost concerned. Because the moment someone realizes you entered this room, they may start asking the same questions that I am asking. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, my hand suddenly trembling again. When Damien opened the vault door for me, I glanced back one final time at the endless shelves of carefully guarded memories. Somehow I knew I was not leaving the mystery behind. I was carrying it with me, and for the first time in my ordinary life, it felt as though someone else's forgotten past had quietly begun rewriting my own. The elevator doors opened onto the ballroom, and the sound of conversation rushed back around me as though the last hour had never happened. Crystal glasses clinked together. Soft jazz drifted through the room. Guests smiled politely while servers moved between tables with practiced precision. Everything looked exactly the same, yet nothing felt familiar anymore. I delivered the bottle to the private dining room with an apology for the delay. My manager frowned but accepted the explanation that a security checkpoint downstairs had slowed me down. It was not entirely true, but it was close enough to keep more questions from coming. The rest of my shift passed in a blur. Every polished silver tray reflected my distracted expression. Every guest who thanked me sounded far away. I kept replaying Damien's words inside my head. People do not always lie with words. Sometimes the lies are written into the records they leave behind. By the time I clocked out, just after midnight, I felt emotionally exhausted. The summer air outside Manhattan carried a welcome breeze as I crossed the employee parking lot toward my aging blue sedan. I unlocked the driver's door and tossed my apron onto the passenger seat. Before starting the engine, I pulled out my phone. 3 new notifications waited on the screen. One was from my landlord reminding tenants that rent was due in 4 days. Another came from my best friend, Hannah, asking if I wanted breakfast after work tomorrow. The third stopped my breathing for a moment. It came from an unknown number. There was no greeting, no signature, only a single sentence. Check the box your mother told you never to open. I stared at the message, convinced someone had sent it to the wrong person. My adoptive mother had passed away 2 years earlier after a long illness. She had never hidden family treasures or mysterious letters. At least, I had never believed she had. Then I remembered something so ordinary that I had ignored it for years. A cedar box sat on the highest shelf inside my apartment closet. My mother had always smiled whenever I reached toward it as a child. That one is for later, she would say. You will know when it is time. I had forgotten those words until that very moment. The drive home usually took 25 minutes, but it felt much longer that night. Every red light gave my imagination another opportunity to race ahead of me. Had Damien somehow sent the message? Had someone from the hotel? Or was this an unbelievable coincidence arriving only hours after I discovered the hidden archive? I climbed the stairs to my small third-floor apartment and switched on the kitchen light. The familiar space usually brought me comfort. Tonight it felt strangely unfamiliar, as though I had returned as someone else. I did not even change out of my work clothes. I dragged a chair into the hallway closet and carefully reached toward the dusty cedar box resting on the top shelf. It felt surprisingly heavy when I lifted it down. My fingers hesitated over the small brass latch. For years I had respected my mother's quiet request without asking why. Tonight curiosity finally outweighed caution. I opened the lid slowly. Inside were old photographs, a folded baby blanket, several birthday cards, and one sealed envelope with my name written across the front in my mother's unmistakable handwriting. Beneath the envelope rested another silver charm shaped exactly like the crescent moon Damien had shown me only hours earlier. My hands trembled as I picked up the silver moon charm from the cedar box. It was identical to the one Damien had held inside the archive, down to the tiny engraving on the back that I had not noticed before. I turned it beneath the kitchen light until the letters became clear. L and E. My breath caught. My name was Emily, but no one had ever called me by anything beginning with the letter L. I carefully placed the charm on the table and reached for the envelope instead. The paper had yellowed with age, and my mother's handwriting instantly brought tears to my eyes. She had always written my name with gentle curves, as though every letter deserved patience. I broke the seal and unfolded the pages inside. My sweet Emily, it began. If you are reading this, it means life has finally placed you where truth can no longer be hidden from you. I never wanted to keep secrets from you. I only wanted you to have the chance to grow up without carrying burdens that belong to adults. I stopped reading for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. Every sentence felt heavier than the last. I continued. You came into my life when you were 4 years old. You already knew your first name, but you rarely spoke. Whenever anyone asked about your family, you would only hold a little silver moon and cry. The officials believed your records had been destroyed after the apartment fire, but there were too many missing pieces. Someone visited me before the adoption became final. He asked me to promise that if anyone ever came looking for you, I would let you choose your own future instead of forcing the past upon you. My heart pounded harder with every line. The letter never mentioned the visitor's name. Instead, my mother described him only as a young man carrying grief that seemed much older than he was. She wrote that he had thanked her for giving me a peaceful childhood before disappearing without leaving any contact information. My eyes drifted back toward the silver charm. Had that young man been Damien? The possibility seemed impossible, yet everything that had happened during the evening suddenly pointed in the same direction. I reached deeper into the cedar box and found another photograph hidden beneath the baby blanket. It showed my mother years younger, smiling beside a brick apartment building decorated with flower boxes beneath every window. Standing several feet behind her was a teenage boy with dark hair, looking toward the camera with a serious expression. He appeared no older than 16. Even after all those years, I recognized the same blue eyes. Damien. He was not posing with us. He looked as though he had simply happened to be standing nearby when the photograph was taken. My phone vibrated again, startling me so badly that I nearly dropped the picture. Another unknown message appeared on the screen. This one contained only an address in Manhattan and a time. 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Beneath it was one final sentence. Bring the letter. Come alone if you want the rest of your mother's story. I stared at the glowing screen while the apartment fell completely silent around me. For the first time, I realized the mystery was no longer waiting inside someone else's archive. It had been quietly waiting inside my own home for more than 20 years. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the silver moon charm resting beside my mother's letter and the young version of Damien standing quietly in the background of that old photograph. By 8:30 the next morning, I was already driving through Manhattan with the envelope safely tucked inside my purse. The address from the mysterious message led me away from crowded streets into an older neighborhood where brick buildings stood between newly renovated offices. It was peaceful in a way the city rarely allowed. I parked across the street and looked up at the building. There was no business sign, no company logo, only a polished brass number beside a dark wooden door. I checked the message again to make sure. I had not made a mistake. Before I could gather enough courage to knock, the door opened. Damien stood inside wearing a charcoal sweater instead of the tailored suits I had seen the night before. Without the formal jacket, he looked less intimidating and somehow more real. "You came," he said. "I almost did not." "I know." He stepped aside. "Please come in." The building felt more like a private library than an office. Tall bookshelves reached toward the ceiling. Sunlight streamed through large windows, warming the hardwood floors. The atmosphere was calm, almost comforting. Nothing resembled the secretive vault beneath the hotel. Damien gestured toward a small sitting area where 2 cups of coffee rested on a table. I remembered that hotel servers usually survive on coffee, he said. I could not help smiling. You notice that? I notice more than people expect. I sat carefully, still holding my purse against my side. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Finally, I removed my mother's letter and placed it on the table between us. His eyes settled on the familiar handwriting before he looked back at me. You found it. She wrote that a young man visited before the adoption became official. His expression softened with quiet resignation. That was me. I stared at him, unable to speak. He folded his hands together before continuing. I was 17 years old. I had lost people I loved, and I was trying to understand what had happened after the apartment fire. Your foster records had disappeared. Every trail ended with unanswered questions. Then I learned that one little girl had finally found a safe home. I met your adoptive mother because I wanted one thing. What was that? To make certain no one would ever take your childhood away. His answer settled deep inside me. There was no pride in his voice. No expectation of gratitude. Only relief that a promise had been kept. Why did you disappear? I asked quietly. He looked toward the window overlooking the street below. Because your mother asked me to. I blinked in surprise. She said that if I truly wanted you to have a normal life, I had to stop looking over your shoulder. She believed children deserved ordinary birthdays more than unanswered family histories. She was wiser than I was. My eyes filled with tears. The woman who had raised me had protected my future while quietly carrying someone else's trust. Before I could respond, Damien reached into a nearby drawer and carefully placed a weathered leather journal beside the letter. Everything I could never tell you is inside this journal, he said softly. But before you open it, there is one truth you deserve to hear from me instead of reading it on a page. The apartment fire was never the mystery. The real mystery began the day someone made sure every official record of your life disappeared. My eyes remained fixed on the worn leather journal while Damien's final sentence echoed through the quiet room. Every official record of your life disappeared. I had spent years believing my past had simply been unfortunate. Now I realized someone had carefully rewritten it before I was old enough to remember. Who would do something like that? I asked. Damien slowly opened the journal and turned several fragile pages before stopping near the middle. Instead of legal documents or financial records, the pages contained handwritten observations, dates, and photographs collected over 2 decades. Someone who believed protecting a child sometimes required hiding the truth, he answered. There were no fortunes to inherit. No secret empire waiting for you. The only thing anyone was trying to preserve was your chance to grow up without fear or constant attention. He slid one photograph across the table. It showed my adoptive mother standing outside the courthouse on the day my adoption became official. I was smiling beside her, holding the same stuffed rabbit I had noticed inside the archive. Standing several yards away was Damien, younger but unmistakable, watching from a respectful distance. He had kept his promise. He never interrupted my life. He simply made sure I had one. You were there, I whispered. He nodded. Only once after the adoption. I wanted to see whether you looked happy. Why did you never tell me? Because your mother was right. Children deserve memories that belong to them, not obligations inherited from adults. A quiet silence settled between us. For the first time since entering the hidden vault, I no longer felt frightened by him. I felt grateful for someone I had never known was quietly honoring a promise made long before I could understand it. I looked around the peaceful room filled with books, journals, and carefully preserved memories. That archive was never about power, I said softly. It was about keeping people's stories alive. A faint smile finally reached his eyes. Money disappears. Buildings fall. Titles change. Memories are the only inheritance that grows more valuable with time. I thought about my mother, the woman who had chosen love over easy answers. She had given me an ordinary childhood, birthday cakes, school plays, second-hand bicycles, encouragement after every disappointment, and enough unconditional love that I never questioned where I belonged. None of those memories had been false. They had been gifts. I carefully folded her letter and returned it to its envelope before placing it beside the journal. "May I keep reading this?" I asked. "It belongs to you now," Damien replied. Just as the truth always has. Sunlight poured through the windows, filling the room with a quiet warmth that felt completely different from the cold certainty of the vault where we had first met. I realized that the greatest secret I had uncovered was not my identity. It was discovering how many people had chosen kindness without expecting recognition. As I stood to leave, Damien walked me to the door. "What happens now?" I asked. He opened it and looked toward the busy Manhattan street where ordinary life continued without knowing either of our stories. "Now you decide what comes next. The past explains who we were. It should never become a prison for who we choose to be." I stepped outside carrying my mother's letter, the silver moon charm, and a journal filled with answers I had searched for without realizing it. My life had not changed because I discovered a hidden archive. It changed because I finally understood that the most valuable treasures are never locked behind steel doors. They live inside promises kept, sacrifices never announced, and love that quietly protects someone long after they forget your name. Sometimes the richest person in the room is simply the one who never lets a good memory disappear.